The US struck Iran's nuclear sites after Israel told Trump it was ready to go it alone. Trump said the sites were obliterated, but IAEA said no radioactive leak has been detected. Iran says war starts now, but can the mullah regime carry on without the support of the people? How likely is a regime change? What are the signs that a regime change could be coming? Would it be smooth or messy like in Iraq and Libya? I'm joined by two very, very well-informed people about, Iran and Israel. We've got Patkan Azamir, who's an Iran watcher and senior fellow with Foreign Relations, and also an investigative journalist with Middle East Forum. I've known Patkan now for a couple of years. I knew him when he was actually the producer of an Iranian TV station broadcast out of London that was the most watched TV for a long time. So he's got a very good feel for public opinion on the ground in Iran. Ilan Eviatar, an Israeli, he's an author and journalist. And his book, Target Tehran, which came out in 2023, Simon Schuster in the US, was very well received. And it described how Israel fought a covert campaign over close to 30 years to disrupt Iran's nuclear program. If you're interested in the role that Mossad has played over the last basically week, he's the man to talk about that. And he also predicted that Israel was likely to attack Iran by the end of 2025 in the absence of a diplomatic solution. So two people who are extremely qualified, with a lot of respect for them in terms of anything concerning Iran and Israel, as it relates to the conflict right now. The question that's on everybody's mind is that what is Israel's endgame, right? I mean, this thing is unfolded very quickly, so quickly that people are starting to talk about the endgame, right? And then, do you think Israel's endgame is only to set back Iran's nuclear ambition? Or do you think Israel's endgame is to actually affect a regime change in Tehran?
Well, I think that's a great question, and it's definitely one that is increasingly on people's mind. I mean, Israel's declared goal in this operation is to significantly set back its nuclear program, to put it years behind, and also to eliminate its ballistic missile capacity. So, either it wants to do that, or it wants to see, Iran capitulate and agree to some kind of Libya-style deal whereby it agrees to completely dismantle its nuclear military program, to agree to zero enrichment on Iranian soil, to agree to severe restrictions on its ballistic missile program, and to agree to not to engage in the kind of malign activities against Israel that it has done up till now. But let me tell you this. Like, one of the things that struck me when I was working on the book was that nobody was really willing to talk about the issue of regime change and whether Israel and Mossad were doing anything in that direction. And I think in the current context that says a lot. We know that Meir Dagan already back in the mid-2000s was talking about regime change and creating the conditions for regime change. Now we're seeing Israel hit targets that are not directly connected to Israel's nuclear or missile programs or even its military. It's hitting the police, it's hitting the besieged, it's engaged in cognitive warfare actions, it's hit the Iranian propaganda arm and broadcaster. Both the defense minister and the prime minister said both that we will shake the regime, that we will consider assassinating even Khamenei, and they specifically used the words creating the conditions for regime change. In fact, Netanyahu said 2,500 years ago, the Persians freed the Jews in biblical times, and now we will free the Persians.
Patkan, let's come to you, because I think this is sort of an important thing. I mean, the regime in Tehran is so weak, it may not actually be able to survive politically, of a defeat that would force it to give up its nuclear capabilities. I mean, do you think that right now for Iran, giving up nuclear capabilities even under consideration at this point of the conflict?
I have no doubt that the most vital thing for the Ayatollahs is to preserve their hold on power. They've been waiting for 400 years to come to power. They've acted as a parallel government in the last 400 years, always taking the opportunity to take a bigger share of the power until 1979 when they came to power. And in fact, I remember one of the Ayatollahs on the state TV saying, like, everyone's saying, oh, when are the Ayatollahs going to go? When are the Ayatollahs going to go? We haven't come here for a party. We're here to stay. He was saying, like, so their most vital thing is to preserve themselves. They're willing to give up Iran's national interests. They're willing to give up to destroy Iran's infrastructure. They're willing to keep the people in poverty as long as they survive. So to preserve themselves, they're willing to do anything.
Giving up its nuclear capability, wouldn't that be such a humiliating, basically thing that, that politically it will weaken the regime so much it cannot survive politically in Iran afterwards?
Look, don't ever underestimate the Ayatollahs. They can justify anything. They will bring out some hadiths from somewhere no one's ever heard of, and they will explain why their position is. There's a famous story. I mean, it might not be true, but there was a period in Iran's history where the sugar cubes were imported to Iran, and the Ayatollahs at the time, they didn't get a cut of the duties, the income that was coming. So they said it was haram, the sugar cubes. And then everyone boycotted it, and then the Belgians who were importing the sugar cubes, they finally had to go up to the Ayatollahs and say, okay, so we're willing to give you a share, but I mean, you've just said it's haram. So what are you going to say now? How are you going to say it's not haram anymore? So they said, don't worry about that. We'll work out a way to do it. So they said, okay, what you have to do is dip the sugar cube into the tea and then have it, and then it's not haram, right? I mean, I'm not quite sure how true that story is, but it's an example of how they can justify everything. So in the Shia theology history, you've got the successors to Prophet Muhammad. So you had the second Shia Imam, Imam Hassan. He had a large army. He had all the means, but he capitulated to the Umayyad Caliph. And his brother, who had a very small army, only 72 men, he was martyred, and all his companions were killed in opposing the Umayyad Caliph. And they justified both of them. They justified the fact that the second Imam, with all the means that he had at his power, capitulated and accepted the peace deal. And they also justified the way his younger brother, decided to stage an uprising with only 72 people and all get killed. So they will find a way to save face. That I'm sure of.
I cannot imagine that Israel could have achieved what it did by killing these people without help from the inside, especially from the highest, level of the government, military, because you have to kill these people all at the same time. Like before they all go underground and become totally like out of reach. So from that point of view, like the kind of intelligence you need presumably is fed from the inside. Now, if Israel has that kind of penetrations in terms of informers, collaborators inside the government, the military, I mean, is it possible that the end game was always a coup for Israel? Because presumably these people want to help Israel only insofar that they themselves might be in a position of taking power and whatnot. So do you think that, again, what we saw last week in terms of the ability of Israel to achieve what it did in such a quick fashion is a sign that actually a coup is more likely than not?
I think Mossad had very deep intelligence, not just from sources on the inside, also from signal intelligence, and in 2018 it stole the nuclear archive from Iran, and that wasn't just a smoking gun and the excuse for the first Trump administration to withdraw from the JCPA a few weeks after Netanyahu revealed the heist, there was also, a roadmap that enabled Israel to so methodically hit the program, to not just to assassinate all these leaders, but also to know the names and identities and to assassinate 14 nuclear scientists who were the core of the team working on weaponization, working on the acceleration of the nuclear program, obviously together with intelligence gathered after that and indeed before. I mean, Israel's penetration, Mossad's penetration of Iran has been very deep for a long, long time. It's been able to carry out assassinations, cyber attacks, sabotage, all sorts of things. So since the mid 1990s, accessing supply chains, poisoning supply chains. So it's a very deep intelligence operation.
One cannot help but to compare what Israel has managed to achieve in the last, 18 months in Gaza versus what it's managed to achieve in Iran. I mean, obviously, Gaza is a tiny handkerchief of a place. Iran has got a population of 92 million people. There's no doubt that Israel has been far more successful against Iran than it has in Gaza. And I think one reason we all know is the fact that the Gazans are completely brainwashed by hatred and religion. They seem to be quite fanatical to the extent that, and also, by the way, Israel clearly doesn't have informers, whatever, collaborators, and then they get killed off, by the way. Collaborators and informers are, if they're suspected as such, they get, executed right away. The question is, why is this? I mean, I don't know. It's because Israel's invested more effort in Iran than in Gaza. That's the difference. What do you think that we all know that the government, the regime in Iran is quite unpopular. And there are many people within Iran that would like to see the regime fall. So from that point of view, do you think it's easier for the Mossad or Israeli intelligence agencies in general to recruit collaborators and informers and such? And that's why Israel has been able to be more successful in Iran than it's been the case against Gaza, against Hamas in Gaza.
Well, I think, definitely there's a difference between the people in Iran and how they feel towards Israel with people, say, in Gaza. See, we've had relations with Israel before 1979, and we had good relations. We both benefit from it. I remember always going to the Iran-Israel football matches. Normally, we were always in the final together. And we don't have a territorial dispute with Israel. Israel doesn't want any sort of part of territorial Iran. Iran doesn't want any, or a normal government in Iran wouldn't want any territorial part of Israel. Israel doesn't want to call the Persian Gulf the Arabian Gulf. Israel isn't talking about the disputed islands. So we've not got any national interest in opposing Israel. In fact, we've both benefited from the relationship that we had before 1979. So obviously people in Iran would feel differently. And the thing is, people see the clerics as their immediate enemy, not this state that isn't responsible for the troubles that they're going through at the moment. So, but I'm not sure if for sure Israel has got the superiority in the intelligence, and it's getting its information from some. But I'm not sure if it's from the population itself, because definitely not from the opposition, because they wouldn't have access to the sort of information that they have. But I just noted today. I mean, I don't know, but I'm just saying they haven't killed a single cleric yet, so which would make them very popular. And I'm just wondering if the actual source of espionage is within the clerical circles or from their children, who are willing to sell anything, for their own interest always. So, I mean, we don't know, but definitely Iranian people a lot of the Iranians would see Israel as liberator. And at the end of the day, listen, I mean, a totalitarian regime, it's hard to be overthrown by a revolution. Iranian people have had at least 4 massive uprisings in the last 20 years. they've all been brutally quashed, to the extent that they sort of like giving up. They don't believe they can win against the regime via a street revolution by coming under the street, because they find them too powerful. And totalitarian regimes often get overthrown by a liberation army from outside. I mean, say for example the example of Pol Pot in Cambodia, with the killing fields, and would the Cambodian people been able to overthrow the Pol Pot regime unless the Vietnamese came in and liberated them? So I think there's at least, I mean, I don't know, I can't give you a percentage, but definitely a large percentage of the Iranian population that not only they don't have any enmity towards Israel, they actually see them as liberator. As long as these targeted attacks remain targeted against the regime officials than civilians.
You're not going to see Israeli boots on the ground to liberate the Iranian people. But I think the feeling in Israel is that if it attacks the symbols of the regime, if it attacks the police, if it attacks the Basij, if it engages in cognitive warfare, that perhaps that can get the Iranian people out on the streets in the kind of numbers that will eventually topple the regime.
Have there been like opposition forces within the military that's already like in the power structure that wants to sort of overthrow the regime from the inside? What I'm saying is like, if I'm the Mossad, I'm going to go and recruit informers and collaborators in Iran, right? There are two ways to do this. Either like I find somebody and then I find out that, they're sleeping around, or that they did something bad and I've got something bad over that person and I'm going to use that against him and use it, to control him. Or I'm going to find someone who's sympathetic, okay, who hates the regime, wants to change Iran, and believe that by collaborating with Israel might actually accelerate, okay, basically, the change for the better for Iran. So I'm just saying, like, obviously the first type, of person we see a lot in spy movies, right? The second type, I don't know. I'm just wondering, like, again, would it surprise you a lot if indeed, let's say the head of the Quds force or somebody else of similar standing that is involved, or that, is there any evidence that, for example, there are military units, okay, within the general army and not the Revolutionary Guards that hate the Revolutionary Guards, that would love to be able to have an opportunity to basically overthrow the regime, with the help from Israel? I mean, how does one think about this? I mean, I know, like, there's probably not that much information out there about any of this, but so, like, do you have any thoughts? Have you ever heard anything that would suggest that this could be even considered a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, even within the Revolutionary Guards itself, look, there have been so many purges in the last 45 years. There is a reason why they set up so many parallel forces. I mean, just within the intelligence circle. So we have the Ministry of Intelligence, which is sort of like aligned with the government. They're supposed to be the more clever ones. Then we have the IRGC intelligence, which is separate from the Ministry of Intelligence. Then we've got the IRGC counterintelligence, which is, again, another force to itself. And they hate each other. And they're always competing with each other, and they hate each other. I haven't had any close contact with Revolutionary Guards commanders myself, but I know people who have. And they tell me, look, when you see them face to face, when you sit down with them, they're not really Islamic or anything like that. They can't wait to see the back of the Ayatollahs. They want their children to go to the West. They want their children to be comfortable and well off. And just before the Israeli attack on Thursday, I was speaking to someone who'd gone to Iran for about 8 months. He was in Iran for 8 months. And he was telling me he'd gone to this place in Iran, to this like a restaurant sort of thing. And suddenly he saw people were being served alcoholic drinks. I'm not talking about a party behind closed doors. This is a restaurant, that anyone can walk into, sort of thing, like, cocktail waitresses without headscarf coming up to them saying, like, what cocktail would you like? And he was saying, like, he was very scared to actually have an alcoholic drink, because he was there, like, temporarily. He didn't want to get in trouble and not be able to come out of Iran and all that. And he was saying, like, I was saying, no, it's okay. But other people were drinking alcoholic drinks and all that. And he was wondering, how is this possible? How is this place not closed down? And he found out that the place is actually run by the IRGC. So this is the situation. Look, the actual people that really still believe in clerics, I mean, you've got to be extremely stupid to believe in their superstitions, their backward way of thinking. Iranian people have moved forwards. They distance themselves from the clerics. The clerics are really in a minority.
The fact is that, until 50 years ago, before the Islamic Revolution, Iran is the richest country in the Middle East, with a very secular, modern, forward-thinking, and generally Western population, right? So from that point of view, like 50 years, not such a long time for that to be lost. Clearly, the regime has been able to survive through repression, but nevertheless, the Persian people are the Persian people, been around for more than 3,000 years. And then until very recently, they saw themselves as, modern and then secular and then, and so on and so forth. So that historical memory, I imagine, is still very, very strong in Iran in terms of driving the identity of the Iranian people.
Yeah, definitely. There's always this conflict in the Iranian character. It's pre-Islamic history and it's post-Islamic history. And especially with the young people after the 1979 revolution, not only they didn't become more religious, they became more interested in their pre-Islamic national identity. I would actually say that the average Iranian before 1979 was far more religious than now, because now they've seen the Islamic rule. They know what it's like. The average Iranian people is much more informed about Islam, about what's written in the Quran, what's written in the Hadith, than the Muslims that I've seen from other countries. Before 1979, I don't think anyone would dare to criticize Islam, and I don't think there was any need to criticize Islam. It was a personal thing. Some people had spiritual beliefs, some people didn't. It didn't really matter. But after 1979, they see a lot of things have gone wrong, and they see an Islamic government. So obviously they think, well, why have things gone wrong? It's because of the Islamic government. So that's why they have changed. That's why, in fact, now this is the strange thing. After 45 years of Islamic rule, the people in Iran are actually more secular than they were before 1979. But you talked about like the regime having been able to survive in the last 45 years through pure oppression, which is true. I mean, a lot of it is due to repression. But there is another factor to it, and that is the stupidity of the Iranian opposition outside Iran. It's just so ineffective, so divisive, so non-consequential. And one of the reasons they've survived is that, in fact, sometimes you hear Iranians say that the Islamic Republic is its own worst enemy because it's always shooting itself in the foot. It does something that damages itself. And then the opposition outside Iran does something that sorts of things out and makes the regime look better. So they say that the Islamic regime is its worst enemy, and its best friend is the opposition outside Iran.
If basically, audience, who are watching this video want to form a view about what is going to happen, unfold the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, what signs will you be on the lookout for as to when, like the vulnerability of the regime that is about to fall, it's on the verge of collapse?
At the moment, I don't see any tangible evidence that as yet people in Iran have sensed that the regime is so weakened that they can come out on the street and take them on. I don't see the balance has changed. Certainly the regime has got weaker, but it hasn't tipped to the point where I can see the people having the confidence to come out on the street. Certainly the day after the Israeli attack, which was a Friday, and the Friday prayers went ahead business as usual, so it showed that the regime is still in control. However, this could change, and it could change very quickly, because I mean right now I had very few contacts with people in Iran today because the internet shut down and everything, but one person I managed to get through There's queues outside bakeries. The banks are shut. People can't take money from the ATM, so they can't pay for their things. And Tehran was almost shut today. All the, I don't know how they're going to carry on to pay for their food and for their everyday things. So things could change. However, there is a difference between what Reza Pahlavi is facing today and what the situation was in 1979 when Khomeini was leading the revolution. Khomeini was fortunate enough to have a network inside Iran, and that network was the mosques. Unfortunately, every town, every district, every village had a mosque. Each mosque needed a minimum of 3 people to run it. So that was a physical network underground that could implement his orders, his wishes. And the month before the revolution, there were revolution committees that were formed again in every district that were practically controlling the city. And they were based in mosques. So he had a physical network underground that could implement his wishes and also control it. And he had already decided who was going to be, he decided who the provisional prime minister is going to be, who's going to be in the provisional government, who's going to be the Friday press. So the revolutionaries that were coming on the street, first they had the confidence that the Shah's regime is so weak that they can take him on. They had a physical network underground where they could control the and target their takeover. And they had an end goal, which was obvious, who was going to come into power. Unfortunately, I don't see any of that now. So it could be that in a couple of days when people can't buy bread, they will come out on the street. But without the Iranian opposition having a physical network on the ground, I don't see how they can control that anger, control that protest. I mean, where is it going to go? I mean, in the previous protests, for example, we saw some of the members of the military, some of the members of the police force, they came and sided with the people, yeah? Which was all well and good. They came and stood with the protesters, but where were they going to go tomorrow, the day after? There was no plan, And this is what we're lacking in Iran. Okay, so we overthrow the regime, then what's going to happen? How are we going to implement elections? How are we going to? And because of that, some people might disagree with me, some people might not like me, but I think the only solution to that is that we need part of the military, preferably the regular army, because the regular army, I believe, still enjoys some popularity amongst the population because they haven't been involved in repressing and putting down the protest. But even elements in the Revolutionary Guards that can say, listen, look, we can't let the Ayatollahs destroy Iran. We've got to save what is left of Iran and come and take over. Look, it may be a military government for a while. We might not have democracy, but at least we'll have order. We'll have a controlled transition instead of having a failed state after the Ayatollahs, like that happened in, say, for example, Libya and other places. And I think some sort of signal should be the example that I was in another panel there, and there was Eric Norava, who's served 2 tours in Iraq, and he agreed with me. And the example he gave was the de-Baathification after the overthrow of the Saddam Hussein. So if you give the message that all the Revolutionary Guards are going to be killed, all the military are going to be killed, well, then they're going to say, okay, we might as well fight to the end then. So. But if you give them a message that, hang on a second, there's something in this for you as well, if we put away the clerics, then perhaps we can have that controlled transition where we can then build the structures for a more democratic future Iran. But right now, in the lack of seeing a physical network underground by the opposition, I think that's the only option. Maybe people don't like what I'm saying, but give me another solution. Give me, tell me how you think this should go forward, because, everyone, you get all these opposition figures outside Iran. Some of them, people that don't even know who they are, and I see them on Twitter and all that, calling for people to come on the streets. Do you really think people inside Iran are going to listen to you posting something on Twitter and come on the street? They come on the street. What next?
I do think that, if they've given so much thought to basically, the attack, to be able to pull it off as precisely as the Israelis have. I'm going to assume that they're also thinking about the day after. But what you're saying, which I think is very important, is that for us to even think that there's going to be a regime change or coup, whatever, we first of all have to see people in the streets, calling for change. And then that has to happen first in order for any, military units or whatnot to basically take advantage of the power vacuum to stand with the protesters and then go from there. You would agree with that, right? But we haven't seen that yet so far.
Yeah, I do agree with that, and I'm not privy to what the Israelis are planning. They may have planned that, but I think their priority is to stop the nuclear threat, to weaken the regime as it is. An orderly regime change, an orderly transition I think, is the icing on the cake, but it's not the immediate priority. But I'm hoping that they have planned it. If they haven't planned it, it's still not too late to plan it. But I honestly think that's the only way forward.
Because we saw that in Syria recently, right? You had Assad was overthrown in a month. You had a government, and another month later, that the president has already been, basically paraded in the European capitals, even met with Trump and so on and so forth. So it can be done. I mean, we just saw this now in Syria. Now, you may not like the guy; that's a different story. But
Yeah, but Syria wasn't the people coming on the street that overthrew Assad. Syria was like an organized paramilitary, if you want to say, that was backed by a foreign state. So it wasn't just like people coming on the streets and overthrowing it. And we don't have the equivalent of, thank God, in some ways, the al-Sharaa forces that overthrew Assad.
You may have somebody from the inside, but that even if you have it from the inside,
yeah,
these people need an excuse to basically go out, and basically, and recruit support and so on and so forth, right? So I think, and right now Israel has a very strong.
Yes, I agree with you, and it could be the other way around as well. It could be like the military comes out first, and then people become more encouraged, and they come on the street, or it could be the other way around. Yeah, I do agree with you. As we're speaking, that hasn't happened.
Exactly.
If it does happen, what I'm saying is that the only organized physical entity on the ground that I think can control that overthrow and transition is a section of the military that would realize, listen, let's save Iran and let's not sacrifice ourselves for the clerics.
The question really is, at this point on everybody's mind, is how much longer, can Iran basically keep fighting, right? I mean, they're obviously, again, I think some people might disagree, whatever it is. It's difficult to sort of objectively measure whatever, how much, what each side has claimed about successes against each other is true or not true, whatever it is. But the point here is this. One thing we do know for a fact, however, is a number of missiles that Iran has been able to fire off against Israel has been going down every day, practically, right? I mean, I think the first day was like 200 missiles, and then 100, and then 75, and then 50. I think the last 24 hours, it feels like it was about 20 and 30 based on what I can see. Everybody knew before the war that Iran had something like 3,000 missiles. And we know that Iran has developed hypersonic missiles. Do you think Iran has actually already sort of used, all its military capabilities in terms of hitting back Israel? Or do you think that they're holding back something? How much longer can they stay in this fight and cause damage to Israel and maybe even the neighboring countries?
We know that Iran has launched about 400 missiles since the conflict began, and we know that they had around 2,000 or 3,000. So Israel has gone for a sort of two-pronged strategy. It's hit missile silos, missile stockpiles, and it's going primarily after Iran's missile launches. You can have as many missiles as you want, but if you can't shoot them, then they're no good to you whatsoever. So Israel has been systematically targeting these missile launches, hunting them down, and Israeli intelligence officials said they believe they've already hit something like 70% of Iran's missile launches. So that means they can shoot less and less every day, and every day, every time they fire, Israel is hitting these launches and putting them out of action. So we don't know how long exactly they can keep going, how much damage they can do. But I mean, these missiles, every one missile that gets through, they carry hundreds of kilos of explosives, and they do enormous damage. Luckily, Israel has many houses in Israel have safe rooms inside the apartment, and that's saved many lives. I think one of the reasons Netanyahu stated for launching this operation was that he said Iran was trying to build up a huge arsenal of 10,000, 20,000 missiles, and the Iranian plan, as far as we know, was to have fired 1,000 missiles in its initial response. But Israel obviously hit a lot of its stockpiles, a lot of its launches. But you can imagine, even if only 10% get through, the kind of damage that could do. And I think the question is how much can Iran take? And we know that for example, in the Iran-Iraq war, they took 8 years of punishment. They know how to suck it up, but and when Israel will stop, and that depends on Israel's endgame. I think Israel, if there is no agreement reached, no agreement to dismantle the nuclear program, etc., then Israel will at some point sort of call a stop, and then it will adopt the kind of model it's adopted in Lebanon with Hezbollah, whereby there's a ceasefire. Hezbollah hasn't been completely destroyed, but every time Israel sees Hezbollah trying to creep back into South Lebanon, every time it sees it trying to rearm, it strikes. And I think we'll see the same kind of thing there. If Israel, if there's no agreement, and there's no regime change, then Israel, every time it sees Iran trying to renew its missile stockpile, it will strike. Every time it sees it trying to rebuild aspects of the nuclear program, it will strike.
Israel expected 5,000 casualties in Israel as a result of this attack. So from that point of view, the fact that so far, 20-something people have died, is, clearly is much less bad than, forget about the worst case scenario, even the central scenario that was set out by the military planner. Now, and we also know that the majority of those 20-something people who died in Israel as a result of these missile strikes, they were not in a shelter for one reason or another. But the vast majority of Israelis have so far survived better than what the Israeli government has actually was forecasting. Now, tell me, do you think, this is actually rather important, because obviously Israeli society has been completely divided over the conduct of the war in Gaza, which has dragged on longer than most people would have expected. Now, when it comes to Iran, despite the punishment the Israeli population has taken in terms of the destruction, dead, and injury, and so on and so forth, do you feel that, what would you say that the country is completely behind basically this move? Or do you feel like, it remains divided and therefore is not sustainable at the current, basically, pace?
No, I would say Israelis are pretty much completely behind this action. We're seeing Iran lob missiles, randomly at civilian areas. So we can imagine, what the effect would have been if Iran was allowed to build up a much larger missile arsenal, and if, God forbid, they got their hands on a nuclear weapon. So the people are very much behind, but people were very much behind the Gaza operation immediately after October 7. So how much people stay behind a military operation very much depends on its success and how long it goes on. So if in a month's time Israel is still taking heavy missile fire, still taking casualties, then support could well drop.
Yeah. But your feeling is that they're going to try to do this quickly, right? I mean, basically, that, they said at the outside, this was going to be a 2-week thing, right?
Yeah,
So
I think it's going even better than expected. I mean, look, Israel within 3 days had achieved air superiority over Iran, which is a massive country the size of France, Germany, and Spain. I think infinitely larger than Israel, and 1,500 kilometers, and it's away at its nearest border, and at some points, over 2,000 kilometers away. And Israel has achieved, within the space of a few days, complete aerial superiority, something that Russia has been unable to do in Ukraine in 3 years of war. So, so far this operation is going very, very well. The question is, how far can Israel set back the nuclear program and the missile program?
I see a lot of people trying to put down what Israel has achieved so far in this war. They're saying, oh, well, whenever Iran has hit Israel, that Israel may be trying to hide it, whatever the damage, destruction. Now, you worked for the Jerusalem Post in the past. I mean, I just want to say that, I mean, having lived in Israel, like I sort of feel like the press in Israel is as open as it gets. You're there on the spot. Tell us.
Yeah, I mean, you can't hide anything in Israel. I'm very surprised they managed to keep the details of this operation so quiet for so long. But really, I mean, our kids are in the army. Everybody has social media. People are sending pictures. I mean, I slightly disagree with what you said before, because I think at least the Western governments know very well what Iran is up to, and they have been pretty much behind Israel. And it's a kind of major diplomatic achievement. The G7 made a very clear statement. The German chancellor said, Israel is doing the world's dirty work. There have been discussions of, will we participate? I think in the UK today there was talk of the opposition saying we'll support the government if they decide to intervene. So popular sentiment may be against Israel, but I think Western governments know very well what kind of regime they're dealing with.
That's why I think the timing of this attack on Iran is almost perfect. I mean, to the extent that IAEA has just basically released their extensive reporting about Iran has been in violation, especially unveiling what it knew about the secret activities, which until now has not gone public. So from that point of view, Germany, France, and the UK have already come on board. They were about to basically push through essentially resolution through the UN to essentially reintroduce sanctions. So from that point of view, like BB, you could argue that these plans have been in place for a long time, perhaps but the question was choosing the right time to pull the trigger. The only sort of risk that I see is obviously if the Chinese were to suddenly get involved, right? I mean, the Chinese have invested tens of billions of dollars in Iran over the last 10 years. They import almost 20% of their energy needs from Iran at a very discounted price. The reason why they decided to make Iran their second most important strategic partner after Russia is because China's wary of potential oil embargo on China imposed by the US. And this is the reason why China is trying to basically build this land route to the Middle East, through Pakistan, Afghanistan, into Iran, so that if the US were to decide to turn off the oil, that China will still be able to keep going, to keep its economy going. This is why the relationship with Russia is so important, with Iran is so important. Both of them are major energy producers. There was a report basically a few days ago, and a Chinese plane on its way from Brussels to, China got diverted, and then it was flying the direction of Iran, that it landed in Turkmenistan before it disappeared from the radar. And then later on, it made it back in the radar. It was still in Pakistan. But anyway, the point here is that there had, some people, like again, in the dark web, whatever, people are talking about the fact that similar Chinese cargo had landed in Pakistan. I don't know if that's true or not. 3 days after the blow up between, India and Pakistan, and then 3 days later, the Pakistani shut down 5 Indian planes. Whatever it is. So the question, obviously, if China were to get involved, this will be kind of scary. And then who knows, if if Trump had returned home from the G7, earlier than expected and convened a national security meeting, he said it was something big. Is it possible that he saw the same report? Who knows? But I am right now assuming that's a small risk, only because I think the Chinese wouldn't want to be fighting on the losing side at this very late stage of the war, especially given I don't think Putin is going to enter this war. And that's because if Trump has done anything clever at all, is the fact that he's making Putin to choose between Ukraine and Iran. He's telling Putin, I'm going to cut you some slack on Ukraine if you stay out of Iran. And I think this is the reason why Trump has not gone down the path of imposing sanctions on Russia, despite the fact that Putin has rejected his ceasefire proposal. That's the reason why Trump hasn't sent more arms and basically money into Ukraine. All this is to basically ensure that Putin stays out of Iran. If Russia stays out of Iran, it's very difficult for the Chinese to get involved in Iran without the Russians.
We've got to give a message that no one's going to lose out because of like a post-Ayatollah Iran. If anything, they're going to benefit from it. And I'm happy for that message to be given, and I'm happy for that sort of deal to be made behind the closed doors.
I don't see either Russia or China getting involved. I don't think Russia is going to come to Iran's help. The Chinese they always sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight.
On that note, thank you both very much for your absolutely great, informative discussion. And I learned a lot. I'm sure the listeners are going to learn a lot. And let's just basically keep our fingers crossed and pray for the best. On that note, thank you.
Thank you.